Good day, folks. Hello. And we, the Two Maesters, are back talking to you about Vikings. And every time we say Valhalla, we're going to push that button because it's so intense and loud. And wow, Vikings. Boy, have we spoken about this before on the podcast. So if you've heard it before, Let's refresh your memories. How you doing today, Josh?
I'm good, thanks. Things the weather has improved, as you know, probably all of you know that me and Morgan are British, so the weather's always a common topic.
It's the only thing we talk about in the UK, that and what the Vikings did to us.
Yes.
And you know, we love the Vikings on Two Maesters. It's been a long time since we've talked about doing it, and here we are. And how we're going to do about this, we're going to approach it from like talking about the history side of Vikings first, and then we're going to trickle in perhaps something about, you know, how you see it in TV. So you got Vikings, the TV show that was on the History Channel, and you've got The Last Kingdom, which I can't remember what channel it was on, but it's on Netflix now.
It started off like a BBC, I think it was a BBC Netflix like collaboration, and then was it BBC and someone else, and then it left BBC to then be solely on Netflix.
I think so. It's interesting to see that happen with a BBC show, because usually it just ends up on like some of those rogue channels that you see on Sky if you've got that. I mean, I just stream everything nowadays, so kind of fascinating when people talk about that. So, Vikings, who were they? Well, let's first of all just think about what comes to your mind at first when you hear Vikings, Josh.
The first thing I would say that comes to me is just like their longboat. The fact that they usually have like the dragon's head at the longboat, and then people jumping off a Viking longboat to raid a village. That's my image of Vikings as soon as I hear the word.
Yeah, me too, pretty much. You think of this immense warrior culture that is based around pillaging and taking what's theirs through just force of violence, really. And that's something we'll talk about, actually, that why is it that's the first perception we have of Vikings. So who were the Vikings? Now, Vikings is the modern name given to seafaring people originally from Scandinavia, which is present-day Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and to an extent Iceland and Finland, but also arguably other areas that the Vikings colonized, such as East Anglia in England, or in northern England, Northumbria sort of area, and in various parts of Russia, Ukraine. Hell, you could even say Normandy. Like it's The Vikings did win in the end, it seems. Yeah, they did. I mean, they went far, man. Like it's just crazy. But let's not be too trigger happy. Let's slowly trickle it into our audience. That's how we do things on Two Maesters. We don't give up all the goodies straight away. So it's the modern name given for seafaring people originally from Scandinavia, who from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries raided, pirated, traded, and settled throughout parts of Europe. They also voyaged as far as the Mediterranean, North Africa, Volga, Bulgaria, as it was called back then, the Middle East, and North America. Like, madness. Madness. Like we know that Vikings definitely came to the UK because that's, you know, where you see all these historical dramas such as Vikings, The Last Kingdom. We know they went to France. We know that they went to Russia, Ukraine, but you know, we're giving all these modern names, but back then these were barely even states at that point in history. Now, what surprised me when I was watching the Vikings TV shows when they said they were going to go to Spain, I was like, what? I didn't even know they went to Spain. And then like Italy as well. I think I watched like up to season 4-5 when Ragnar, you're gone too soon. Rest in peace, my friend. Dies and it's like kids take over. But I was just amazed that like they've actually did traces all around. Anywhere in Europe that's near a coast or river is pretty much like familiar with the Vikings. And, you know, North America, well, Vinland is probably the first place that European people from Europe, so in this case the Vikings, were the first people to discover North America. Not to say, you know, when people say who are the first people to discover North America? It's like, oh yeah, it was the Vikings. It's like, well, you know, that's a very Eurocentric view. There's other cultures that maybe from South America or from even some argue maybe Polynesians discovered North America first because of their boats. Yeah.
And funnily enough, based on this is another tangent which is really weird. The fact that Polynesians, based on their shipbuilding and their seafaring, that they stretch from Hawaii all the way out to Australia, and you just think that's almost the extent of the Pacific. So they probably could have gone to maybe to trade and then come back to Hawaii.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, you know, this is not a time when people could sail in deep waters very easily. And the Polynesians, I'm not sure what era people theorize it was that they sailed to the USA or like with them sailing to, where was it you said they sailed?
Oh, Hawaii.
Hawaii? Yeah. Oh, my God.
Because I think historians believe that they moved from like Asia and then continued moving. And because they're like seafarers and migrants, so that they would go from island to island trading between each other.
Right.
And it's just weird. Like, we always think that the world is even linking back to the Vikings wasn't really traveled as much until like the 1800s. But then you look at the Vikings, just look at that extent, North America, Canada, all the way out to the Middle East. And you're like, that distance is ridiculous.
Yeah, I know. And it's crazy. Yeah. It's really crazy. And, you know, we talk about globalization as being a specifically modern thing that's happened, started maybe in the post-World War II period, let's say. Yeah. Some people say it started in the 1980s as, you know, neoliberalism took hold. But really, there's waves of globalization. This is what I studied at university, that arguably for lack of a better word, empire was a form of globalization, because globalization is just the narrowing of distances, communication channels, people meeting people from different cultures that just aren't from the other side of the world. But I mean, Polynesians, holy cow, like they were going a long time ago. Do you know what era that was in, roughly?
I'm not sure which era, but I think we can double check and come back next episode.
We'll do an episode on basically all the things that we say that are historically inaccurate and law-wise inaccurate. Yes. We're talking about real-life law, so today, as opposed to nerdy fantasy and science fiction law. But yeah, essentially, you have Vinland in the present-day USA, or is in the province of Newfoundland in North America. And, you know, there's Viking settlements that they find there. Iceland as well, very clearly has quite a strong link between them and Viking settlers. Even in the UK, there's islands called the Shetland Islands, which are the most northern extent of, at least, of the Isles of Great Britain. And rather than tracing their heritage to Scotland or England, their heritage is almost more closely related to Norwegians. Yeah. Like their names, and people do their DNA test. And even in their culture, they have this festival in January, and like the most depressing, darkest day of the year, someday in mid-January, called Uphilia, where they all dress up in Viking outfits. Although in more modern times, you don't have to wear a Viking outfit now. You can just wear anything that's fancy dress. You have to carry a torch through town. Everyone turns off the lights, and there's this big Viking boat they build out of wood and they set it on fire. It's quite a nice festival because it's such a dark, depressing time. I guess it's a good way to bring people out. And I love the modern twist that you don't have to dress up like a Viking anymore.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like, imagine if it's like a long journey, full on dressed in the chainmail or plate that the Viking would wear, and then dragging that around. And even to your point, it was in the news, like I think a month ago, that Orkney potentially had like were trying to get a referendum in that maybe that they could join Norway. And I was like, wow, so they're really going back to their roots.
Yeah. I mean, go for it. Norway's probably one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Also, one of like the happiest countries in the world, but also one of the most depressed countries in the world because of the weather in the winter. Just so many contradictions. It's amazing. Yeah, good luck, Orkney. I would actually move to Orkney if they become part of Norway. I want to be rich. So a key part of, talking about Vikings is historical interpretations. So most history of Vikings comes from those who were raided and pillaged by them. This is based on some history books I read about this, because I was nerding out about this in like late 2020, early 2021, a book I got. And to a lesser extent, some people that traded and engaged in diplomacy with the Vikings also, describe them in less brutalistic ways. But mainly a lot of the history comes from people such as the Saxons, or, as we'd say, modern day English people, because they're raised and pillaged and colonized by them in areas like East Anglia, etc. Now, why is it they've got such a negative view? Well, Vikings did not record their history in the way like many other civilizations did. They preferred oral history and recording things in runes, which I'm not quite sure what a rune is. I should have done more homework on that. But whilst we were doing paintings and, well, to an extent doing paintings, is mainly just of religious stuff at that time, and writing on paper to a very limited extent, we could record history a little bit better. Even saying that, though, like records from this time aren't very accurate. But the Vikings preferred oral history and telling tales of great sagas. So this is something I think you touched on in the last episode. Because last episode we started going off on a tangent about the Vikings, like we haven't talked about them.
We did.
So, for example, like Ragnar Lothbrok, what was it you were saying about him?
Like, I think Ragnar Lothbrok's historians aren't 100% sure if they believe he exists because his execution is, he's executed by the King of Northumberland.
Northumbria.
Oh yeah, because it comes Northumberland when the Vikings invade. They change their name.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah. So Northumbria, he executes him. So they know that thing took place, but they don't know if all his exploits, all the traveling he did, all the seafaring, him being an explorer, they have taken that from like different Viking sagas.
Yeah.
And they're not sure if all of his sons are all his sons, or if they come from the same mother, or potentially could it be that some of them are his sons, or they took up the mantle. So like, for example, if like for example, you've got like Julius Caesar dies, then you have Mark Antony, you had Octavian, who then became Augustus, then taking up Caesar's mantle and seeking out revenge. You could kind of say that both of them were the heirs to Caesar, but not really his sons.
Yeah.
So historians aren't sure for certain. And they're even not sure if Ragnar Lothbrok kind of existed, but they do know that his sons did because of how they were recorded when they invaded to get revenge for the death of their father.
Yeah, and I think one was Canute the Great, one of his sons?
I think Canute was.
Or was it a different person?
I think Canute is his a descendant. So the way that it works out is you had Sigurd, who I think became the king of I'm probably getting this wrong, king of Norway, or became king of Sweden.
Yeah.
You also had like Ubba, you also had Ivar the Boneless.
Of course.
So they did invade England, but I think Sigurd did not. So his eldest son in the Vikings TV show.
Yeah.
He basically decides to stay in Scandinavia to then develop a kingdom. So Canute comes later. So then what happens is that...
I mean, see that in The Last Kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Canute... so the Vikings... So not to spoil everything, the Vikings invade England.
Can't spoil history, mate.
Which is true. But they can't seem to take Wessex. So the main issue with Vikings was that they were very, very good raiders at the time. So if they were outnumbered you or it was a very quick attack, they were very strong. But every time they would come up against, and you've probably seen this in The Last Kingdom and also in Vikings, when they come up against a strong, stout Saxon army, they would constantly lose until Knut came and he was the king of Norway. So he was able to then unite all of the different tribes, Viking tribes in Norway, invade England to then become king of England and the king of Norway.
As well as Denmark as well. And that's such a powerful position to be in. I saw this, pop up on the internet on like a history meme page. So take it with a pinch of salt, as you know, fakenews.com. But basically, Canute the Great, he's called Canute the Great because he was the king. He became the king of the Saxons. He became the king of Norway, the king of Denmark. At one point, everyone was just trying to rally against him because he was just too powerful.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, maybe one of our audience members can correct me on this, but I think he was the king of Ireland as well, technically, because that was very strongly controlled by the Vikings at one point.
He had parts, I think, so the Viking settlers had settled in Ireland and had taken parts
I love the way he said it. I'm like half Irish, and I love how you actually put a bit of a twang on it, as opposed to most British people.
I grew up in like the Irish part of Kentish Town.
Oh,
so
right.
then a lot of the people like, no, it's not Ireland, it's Ireland.
It's not Island as if it's an ass. Yeah, fair enough.
So then several Vikings settled there, and I think one of the things he also built was a dike between England and, which I think you can still see, between England and Wales,
right?
Because the Welsh kept on like invading into England after he'd taken control of it.
Right,
and I think, I've probably said this earlier, but then through Knut the Great, William the Conqueror has his claim to England, because Knut the Great's wife was Emma of Normandy, and she was, funnily enough, she was also married to the previous king of England. So imagine, like,
oh my God,
her husband loses in battle, so then she marries King Knut. So she has two sons, one who is the heir to the England through the Saxons, and one who's the heir to England through the Vikings.
Powerful.
So then, at one point she was she was the most powerful woman in Western Europe, because literally her husband had died. So literally she had two sons. So she was in charge of the Saxon dynasty, the Norse dynasty, and her son was king of, as you said, Denmark, Norway, England, parts of Ireland, northern Scotland as well. And also she had claims to Normandy as well, and parts of Francia as well. Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. So, and I guess in those times it was a very extremely patriarchal society. So whoever married her gets those claims as their lawfully wedded husband. At least in Christianity, I'm not sure how it works in Viking culture.
But at that time, they had converted to Christianity.
Okay.
Or they had just converted to Christianity, because I think one of the things that many cultures realized was that they had to convert to Christianity, one, because technology, writing was a key aspect, also for trade. So it would be a lot easier to trade, for example, if you're trading with Europe, if the majority of the Europe is Catholic, and then you've got the other side of Eastern Europe, which is Orthodox. Yeah. It's easier to trade with them if you are also Catholic. And also, being the way that the Catholic Church had set up, if you were Catholic and you were king and you got the oil from the Pope, you were verified as king, so no one could easily just kick you out.
So it helps justify your rule in such a violent time because look what happens in Viking culture, and also in the TV shows. The Vikings at home, they might be out pillaging abroad, but some usurper comes along
out of nowhere.
It's like they don't even have defenses against their own people. They're too busy out pillaging the rest of the world. Yeah. And one thing we didn't really explain, I think we should explain to our audience, is who Ragnar Lothbrok was and what his significance was. So he essentially was a man that somehow, through being open-minded and talking to travelers, managed to find a way to sail to the... I always have to go in my head, never eat shredded wheat, so I can remember which one is east and west. Yeah. So he discovered a way to sail west using very, very primitive forms of like navigation, so like looking up at the stars, but using a special kind of stone. And essentially, he was part of the first raiding party that raided England in the 700s/800s.
Oh my days. Lindisfarne, that's what it was called. Lindisfarne.
Exactly. And you see in the TV show Vikings in the first series, that's where he encounters Applestan, and they pillage, and that's the first encounter with Vikings. And the way that's been described in one of the books I was reading is that demons came from the sea and killed everyone. And back then they would think that, because Vikings are really tall people. Like they were few in number, because the reason why, one of the theories why Vikings were so into a sort of a pillaging culture and so keen to colonize elsewhere is because the climate is quite tough in Scandinavia. And to all the Scandinavian viewers we've got out there, I'm sure you agree, winter is quite a pickle out there.
Yeah. And like, even to your point, it's linked also the fact that you've got Viking Russians, and also that Russia is very similar, and that there's a basic saying that hard environments make hard people. So like, even like people on the exact opposite of the spectrum, so those who live near the desert, they're kind of like, you know what, we generally don't, they're more like harsh because they know that they have limited resources. So like, for example, if someone's trekking through the Sahara and someone's lagging behind, like 400 years ago, it's like, all right then, see you folks, we have to head off because we're not going to end up dying here. And like, to your point,
very harsh reality. Yeah.
And like, to your point, like living in Scandinavia, where if you lived near the north, where most of the year you couldn't grow anything, you would then have to pillage and raid just to survive.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you could trade furs, I guess, but there's only so much you could trade. So this is why they're going abroad a lot. And a lot of them colonized and settled in East Anglia. And so many English people, if you do a DNA test, especially if you're like from the north or East Anglia, you'll find that you've got some sort of Danish or Norwegian blood, and to a lesser extent Swedish. So it explains a lot.
Yeah. And also, I think one thing that people always forget is that there were different types of Vikings. And I think that's one of the things that I really loved the Viking TV show about, is that you would have the Danes, which I believe Ragnar might have been part of the Danes, possibly. You also had...
I'm not really sure. It wasn't very clear in Vikings because he's from Kattegat, but I don't know where that is. And that's probably an old name. Let me see. But yeah, come on, keep going.
So you've got like the Dane Vikings, you've got the Norse, and you've got, as you said, the Finnish Vikings, you've got the Swedish Vikings, you've got the Icelandic Vikings. And funnily enough, which is really weird.
Oh, sorry, you are right. He is Danish, yeah.
Yeah, that you've got like times in history where you had the Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons, and the Danes fighting the Norse. So Knut was Norse, not Dane.
No, right, okay.
So then when he invaded, I think because of like the intermarriage between the different like families, that he did have claim to the Danish land, but he was actually a Norse Viking.
Right, as opposed to a Dane, yeah.
So when he then invaded England at the time, the Saxons and the Danes who were already there, who kind of like fell into line with like English life, were then fighting him. And I think like we always think that it's just like one brush for all Vikings, but no, that they actually did war within each other, and there are distinct differences between each of them.
Yeah, and you know, there's some cultures as well that were referred to as proto-Viking cultures. So along things at the Volga River, one of the big rivers that runs through present-day Russia, but I think it links to the Baltic Sea. A lot of Vikings would navigate down a lot of these rivers and integrate to those cultures to a certain extent, sometimes preserving their gods, sometimes taking on those gods. And it can even explain why Vikings have even gone as far as Constantinople. That's right, present-day Istanbul in modern Turkey. If you go to their Hagia Sophia Palace, or I think it's a museum now, actually, or was it a church or a mosque? It's changed so many uses. If you go down to a certain floor, there's Old Norse runic inscription on the wall that says Halfdan was here, and Halfdan being a name. Crazy, unbelievable. And the story is that one of those proto-Viking-Volga people civilizations actually sacked or tried to sack Constantinople at a certain point in history. I think it failed in the first attempt, and then some later point they did manage to sack it along with some other cultures. The emperor of the Byzantine, or should we say Eastern Roman Empire, because that's still going somehow in one form or another, managed to be impressed by them and actually employed them in his Varangian guard as like a personal bodyguard. Crazy. And it gets even greater because you can even find traces of Vikings in present-day Baghdad in Iraq. Like, you can find some of their swords and armor. That could have been traded, to be honest. So, again, it's hard to say. And there's a lot of Viking burials in Denmark that they're finding Chinese silk in. But again, arguably, that could be through a trading route along the Silk Road, which things can get passed on and passed down.
Yeah.
Now, there are some really cool, interesting things. So there's this famous preserved body in Denmark, and this is arguably a proto-Viking burial, but someone who basically was executed as part of like a sort of tribal ritual. What was their names in Denmark? I need to find them. So I remember this book says, you can't talk about Vikings without talking about these, the Tolland man. So let me show you a picture, because this is it's not too gross. It looks surprising good. This person, I can't remember how old he is. I'll find out in a second. But that man is from the Proto-Viking culture in Denmark. And whilst that does predate the Viking era, that's sort of in the same neck of the woods. And some of the items you can find on him will eventually become very common in Viking culture. So if you get a moment, look at the Tolland man. Bit of a tangent there, but we never go on tangents on this show. So he was found... Oh, he's over 2,400 years.
Wow.
There you go. So actually, that's way before Vikings. Never mind, complete tangent. Don't know why that was in my Viking book I was reading, though.
But their culture is very, very old. And I think one thing that I did find out is that one of the Princes of Ruse, so the Kievan Ruse was actually a descendant from Vikings. Mm-hmm. So as to your point, they did like integrate into the different cultures, and like through him, the Rus, so the Kievan Rus, so present day Ukraine, became Orthodox.
Right. Okay.
Because I think like one of the things he realized, similar to what we were saying before, was that for him to be like established kingdom, he needs to trade. So he either has to take one of the three major religions at the time that was focused in like Europe and also in the Middle East. So whether it was Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, and he was like,
which one should I pick?
He said he couldn't pick Islam because he said he loved alcohol too much and he wouldn't give that up. He wouldn't take Judaism because he loved eating pork. He didn't want to take Catholicism because he said that he didn't want to adhere to the Pope.
Right.
Because then the Pope can literally depose a king, instate a king.
Yeah.
So he said
too much power.
He went to Constantinople and then just saw like the grandeur of it and was like, you know what? Let me just convert to Orthodox. And through that, they sent Greek scholars to go back home with him, and that's how they developed the Russian language and the Ukrainian languages. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how
they're based off like Greek ancient Greek lettering.
That's interesting. Okay, so the Cyrillic alphabet does come from Greek originally. Oh, that's fascinating. I did not know. And I guess that's why you have like the Eastern Orthodox Church is like, and I really don't know much, but that's similar to the Greek Orthodox Church because it's coming through that sort of pipeline. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We can't talk about the Vikings, not talk about, we're talking about that culture. We can't not talk about the gods.
Yes.
The gods! And of course, Valhalla, which amazing. The big part, of what people know about Vikings is like, if I die in this battle, I will feast with the gods in Valhalla at Odin's table. Very epic, very cool. And you see this in, modern movies and television. So, for example, Thor is based off of so many of these Norse gods of mythology. So we've got Odin, who is
the king of the gods.
The king of the gods, the god of thunder, king of the gods, very badass. We've got Freya, who is...
Freya, I believe that's his... No, Freya isn't his wife, is she? No, she's not.
I don't know if she was Odin's wife, but she was the goddess of love. Yeah, goddess of love in Norse folklore. Was she the... No, I don't think she was the wife of Odin, but clearly not. We're clearly not experts on Viking culture. And, can't not talk about Loki. Who was Loki?
God of mischief.
Yeah. Great. And I just love him in the Thor movies as well. Like, you must truly be desperate to come to me for help. Great. Oh, by the way, Loki season 2 come out soon. Can't wait for that. Yeah, I thought Marvel paid me to drop that one in there. Thank you, Marvel.
Yeah. Yeah, and like on your point of the gods, I think one of the things I did love about the Vikings TV series is that the creator said that he didn't want to focus too much on spirituality, but he wanted it to be a part of the cultures. and a part of the TV series. Because like whether it was like the Saxons or when they went to like France, which I think it was like Normandy, when Rollo goes to invade, and then actually Rollo, Ragnar, and all of them go to invade France.
Yeah.
That Christianity is also important there. So he's like, I want to make sure that it's an important element of it. Because like you do see at times, like when Ragnar in season 4, when he's like about to die, that he actually starts to see things that are on the spiritual level, or like, the monk.
Wait, is that when he's getting opium? Is it opium from? There's that Chinese slave he kind of falls in love with.
It's after that. So
after that.
I think it's getting to the stage where he realizes that this is his last run, and then he's like sees like this door that looks like Valhalla, and he kind of feels like he kind of feels like he can't go through because like he hasn't finished yet. And like, also like what happens at the end of like season 3 when the Vikings, sees the end of season 4 part 1, where the Vikings realize that, all the settled Vikings in England have been massacred. And like Ragnar knows this. But
by King Egbert.
Yeah. It was a clever scheme by King Egbert.
Yeah, he was such a clever, handsome
the
king,
fact that he was like, you know what, I'm going to stir up the Saxons in my realm in Wessex, get them to kill these Vikings I don't like. And then I can then kill them and say that, they won because they had dissension, so they potentially could get rid of me later. And 2, I can then go back to Ragnar and say, look, the people who did the crime, they've been executed.
Yeah,
and the fact
that wasn't my idea.
Yeah, and the fact that Ragnar knew about it but didn't tell anybody.
Yeah,
and he could then like at the beginning of like part 2 of season 4 was like everyone going around, which was sad, like going around to like his different sons, going around to his wife, his first wife, and then they're like, she's like, no, I haven't got the heart for this. And then the fact that he has no honor. And then
he becomes a pariah in Viking society. It's quite emotional to see as well, especially see his transition as like such a cool, great character, being so charismatic and always getting the last joke in and always thinking differently from the others. Like the fact that he befriends Applestan, a Christian that he originally, takes home as a thrall, a slave. And I think, does he convert to Christianity? Because do you remember when Floki kills Applestan in season 2 or season 3?
I think it might have been in season 3,
Yeah, and Ragnar just takes him out to the woods by himself, buries him, gives him a Christian burial, says, there's this emotional moments like, why have you left me? Now I'm all alone and I don't know what to do. And he picks up Athelstan's crucifix and puts it on, and that's like end of scene, end credits. And I was like, that's the first like Christian convert in Viking. But whether that's true or not historically, we don't know. But God, what a great show at that moment.
I know. And I think the thing I really did love about their relationship was that you always thought that did Ragnar actually like Applestan? And then you actually start to realize, like, in season 3 and after his death, that he actually did.
Yeah, he saw him as a friend. Yeah, called him a friend. Yeah,
and like also, if you just look at like Athelstan's life, it's just like first taken as a thrall, then accepted as a Viking because he saves when invaders come. Yeah, when invaders come while Ragnar's away, he saves their son.
Yeah,
and he helps their son to prevent the village from being overrun by other raiders who come to the village. So then he kind of gets his freedom there. Then goes out raiding, gets captured by the Saxons, gets crucified.
Oh my God!
And then gets saved because I think the bishop recognizes him and is like, and then it's the king. King Egbert sees him and then asks him to come down, and then he joins King Egbert's court for a while.
He sees value in it rather than giving into the judgmental ways.
And then that's
religion.
Another thing about the season is the whole series is like the spirituality of Applestan, and like everyone who interacts with him, who sees him as a friend, sees him as some like special guy, and the fact that they allude that potentially that Alfred could be actually Athelstan's son, like that's and the fact that then Alfred becomes Alfred the Great, who then defeats the Vikings and then starts to pave the way towards England.
That's such a strange storyline thread, isn't it? And I don't know how much of it's historically true, or even if Ragnar Lothbrok existed, but Vikings, what a great show. That cleverly leads us on to talk about Vikings, the TV show. So it was written by Michael Hurst for the History Channel, and it premiered in 2013, and the final season came out in 2020. Vikings Valhalla premiered in 2022, sort of as a sequel.
Yeah.
I didn't watch Vikings Valhalla, did you?
No, I didn't watch it.
Yeah, I heard the reviews are a bit weak. I know my brother did because he loved. We both loved the OG Vikings, but I just never bothered. I kind of got a bit bored with Vikings because I think after Ragnar Lothbrok's sons take over, there's some cool characters. Like I love Ivar the Boneless, really cool. But I just felt like the actor that was playing Ragnar Lothbrok was amazing. Like he carried the show.
Yes,
great.
He did.
Cool looking guy, always had one-liners.
Yeah.
And he was the star of the show. Even though there's so many characters, it has such a Game of Thronesy feel about it, Vikings. Like it was weird. When I was watching it, Game of Thrones was out at the same time, and I'd say to people, if you're bored waiting for the next series of Game of Thrones,
I was telling my friends the same thing. And it's weird because like Vikings was always in the shadow of Game of Thrones, but then when Game of Thrones started to wane, that's when like Vikings really peaked up. Like I think it was like season 5 what's Ragnar's first wife? What's her name again?
How could we forget? Lagartha
is up against Ivar. I think that was like when it started to like peak towards its like the zenith of like the whole Viking series.
I don't think I got that far, to be honest.
Because like I remember like the amount of times I'd see online or on television that Amazon was pushing this show like full on 100% because they had like the streaming of the show, the exclusive rights, so you could watch it on the History Channel, whether it's on like in America cable or for us on satellite Sky or Virgin Media BT, and they were just pushing it throughout. And then it was like got to the stage it was one of the biggest shows, and I think
and I find it strange. Why was it on the History Channel of all places? Why was it not on a more prime spot like Sky Atlantic or Sky One? Or
I think it started on the History Channel, and I think they wanted to try and see if they could ground it in some form of history. Because like you did have like, for example,
even though they're not sure Ragnar Lothbrok existed. Okay,
like you kind of have like Rome, the HBO's Rome, which is a really really good TV show, which is on HBO. But
that's a good point. No, why was that not on history?
Because like if you look at like the first 2 seasons, you kind of see like they did have to work on a budget, but then when they started to then gain popularity, then that's probably when like Prime picked it up and then started to fund it. Because if you look at the later seasons compared to like the earlier seasons, you can really see the amount of money that's come into it.
Yeah, and some of the fight scenes, because they're careful not to show an entire Viking army. They always show like what looks like small skirmishes, but they pretend that's their army. Because they don't want to hire so many actors or do that CGI where you like duplicate
the
people.
Numbers,
yeah. I think some cool things that really stood out to me in the Vikings TV show is, we live in a world dominated by Hollywood and therefore the English language, and the Vikings speak English in Vikings, and the Saxons who are English speak English. But when they do confront each other in it, the Vikings are speaking in Norse and the Saxons are speaking in the Saxon language of the time. And I thought that's quite a good way to, subtly put that in there without changing anything drastically, and reminding you that no one spoke English. First of all, no one spoke English back in that day in the English we speak, but also even like when a culture encounters another one for the first time, they will have no clue how to speak to each other. And in those times, a stranger approaching your shores in a boat means violence, because they could just be coming to aid. They could even just be a common criminal or a brigand who lives lawlessly.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the allure to like converting to like either Orthodox or Christianity or to Islam for all the cultures around, whether it's the Middle East, North Africa, Europe. It's the fact that you have a common language. So whether if it's Arabic, you do have Islam, you've got Arabic, and Christianity, you either have Latin or anything based on Greek. And also in Judaism, it's either Hebrew or Aramaic. So at least you have something to like converse. I think
have a commonality.
Yeah, and I think Ragnar learnt, if I might be getting this wrong, he learnt English from Attelstan. And I think
Saxon.
Saxon.
Well, English and that, yeah. It's
yeah.
so confusing because the show is an English show, but yeah.
And I think he might have also learned bits of Latin as well. Because then also when they go to France, they can't interact with them. They don't understand.
The French, because they're speaking Frank. Yeah, old French, old Frankish. Yeah. And then Rollo, for example, well, Rollo just loves double crossing. He's got
the double cross master.
Yeah, he's got like such. Is he the younger brother or older brother?
Younger brother, yeah.
Yeah, well, he's got some sort of syndrome about him because he double crosses his brother with that Viking. What was his name? Jarl Borg, who gets blood eagled.
Yeah.
He double crosses Ragnar with him, but then. He stabs Loki with a spear in a big battle, but then they don't fight each other, and after a while gets forgiven. But then he does it again with the whole French thing.
Yeah.
But I love the cute storyline where he just basically falls for that French princess, and like she's like, "Oh, you are ugly. I will never." And then he learns a language, and then it turns out like a bit of a fairy tale, and he goes on to found Normandy, and that's how Northern French have Viking roots. Like, what the hell? Yeah. So weird, so crazy.
One of the things that the writer did say, the creator did say concerning Rollo was that he was later than Ragnar, and that they had no like association at all. But he wanted to bring
if Ragnar existed.
He wanted to bring like something else to the story, which is partly historical. So like the King of France, I believe that he's the King of France or King of Francia, or the specific area that he's in, did actually marry his daughter to a Viking to basically learn how to fight, learn and understand the Viking culture. So therefore, if the raiders come back, I have someone who can actually stop them and also knows the style of fighting they have. And also I can use him to then invade other parts of other Frankish tribes or Frankish kingdoms.
And that's a smart man, just like King Akbar,
Yeah.
It's good to be pragmatic and do things that might be against the norm of like Christians just being, they're apostates, they're sinners, they do not accept Christianity, we will never
Northumbria all over again.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I think the classic line was when the great heathen army invaded Northumbria, and the fact that the priest was like, may God save us, and the king is just kind of like, Bishop, I don't think he can, because they see like how large the great heathen army is, and he's like, I don't think he can.
And this is after he's killed Ragnar Lothbrok, right? And by the way, it's crazy that, of all the ways to execute someone in time, he somehow has a pit of. This is King Aiella of Northumbria. He has a pit full of snakes, and I'm like, this is such a James Bond villain thing to have, like an actual pit full of snakes. Like, why can't you just chop off his head, like the what would have been normal, not a pit full of snakes?
I think also because one thing that I did like about Vikings is that it kind of came out during the same time as those who probably know that me and Morgan are big Total War fans. That I played the Total War saga Britannia. That it's also a part of that storyline as well.
Yeah,
and I think the fact that they probably won because he wasn't Christian, so they didn't have to give him like a decent execution. And two, I think they just wanted to set an example. And like if you see like in the TV series, his daughter is basically like, just let him go. Just send him back. Don't get involved with this. And he's like, no, I must set an example. I am a strong king.
For all of Christendom. I know. I love the way people speak back then. Like, it's very, God wills it. Sometimes I love just going through modern day society talking as if I'm from like the 9th century, just to see how people would react. It's very awkward though. It's very non-understandable. I think some other stuff to mention about Viking show. One thing that's cool is the way they sort of integrate Viking culture into it. So the soundtrack, I don't know if they do the entire soundtrack for Vikings, especially not the intro song's just a modern band, but that's a cool song. But I can't remember what it is. But a lot of the soundtrack's done by this band called Wardruna, which is an epic Norwegian folk music group that very much epitomizes the music of that time of Viking music, very influenced by it. And in a way, it's kind of like folk metal, but using not using modern instruments. Like there's some stuff that sounds very epic, and there's a whole genre that's either been spawned by Wodruna or this sort of like Viking renaissance you see in cinema and TV. So there's loads of bands that have come through. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a big scene, really big scene. And there's this famous Norwegian singer called Aurora, who's a pop singer, but she does some songs with Wodruna, funny enough, because they're quite big and famous, where usually a lot of folk music's very, very just concentrated in one country. So definitely worth giving them a listen, Wodruna. Are there any other moments in Vikings that you really loved, or any sort of details that you liked about it or disliked?
I don't think I can say anything that I thoroughly disliked. I think like one just pet peeve is I think some of the accents weren't as good. Yeah. But you can kind of tell because like the whole thing was based in Canada, because to get all that luscious green, so they did the filming in Canada. So they did get some like Canadian and American actors. But I think one of the things I did like is that at least most of the like cast had some form of Viking ancestry. So whether it was like they were Norwegian Americans or Norwegian Canadians or Norwegian Danish, that some of them actually had that history.
Well, let's see where the guy who played Ragnar Lothbrok is Australian, but what is his family from? Oh, he was a model. Well, I can believe that. Damn, Ragnar. Doesn't really say what his family roots are. But I know for sure that there's a Skarsgård who, the Skarsgårds are like Scandinavian acting royalty. Like, for example, in the Thor series, you've got Stellan Skarsgård, the old man that was the researcher. In the very beginning with Jane, what's her name? Jane or whatever.
Yeah, Natalie Portman's character,
Yeah, Natalie Portman's. And you've got Gustav Skarsgård in this, who's one of their family members. He's been in a lot of things, like Westworld, for example, which we should talk about at some point, because Westworld's amazing. Yes. And he's also in Oppenheimer. Then you've got, I can't remember his name, but there's another Skarsgård in True Blood, and he's been in a lot of stuff.
Yeah. He also was in that Tarzan movie with Samuel Jackson. I remember that.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. I haven't seen that, but yeah, they're everywhere, the Skarsgårds. They are like Norwegian. I don't think they're Norwegian, sorry.
I think they're Swedish, I believe.
Yeah. They are acting, they are Swedish. They are acting royalty, they're very big. But I'm glad they had one of them, because you can't do a show about Vikings without having one of the Skarsgårds, and it's like a rubber stamp.
And I think one of the things I would say that I really did love about the show was that it did really well with the interpersonal relationships. Like, when Lagertha and Ragnar, like their relationship, like it's weird because like he had a new wife because he needed to have like more heirs, and like Lagertha was cursed, and like she felt that she was cursed and wouldn't have any more children. So he then married someone else, but then you see like in season 4 that he still loves her. Yeah, and he probably loves her more than his actual wife.
Yeah, what was her name? We've got it. Aslog.
I believe that it's.
I'm definitely killing that pronunciation there. Who's like some like weird sage or something? Not sage.
Princess. Sage.
But she claims she has some sort of magical powers, and her dad slew a sea dragon. Which it's weird because in this show they do show weird religious stuff. Like for example, Applestan has visions of the gods, like of Christ, but also he really is.
That's another thing that I really did love about
culture.
That show. Yeah, is that you did kind of, because as I said before, like the writer wanted to make you feel as if you were in that element. Like religion is a key part. So like Athelstan was basically like the in between person for the audience to help us kind of like understand the differing cultures, and also how like the cultures can also combine.
Yeah.
And mold and meld together. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And, maybe he's symbolic of some of the hybrid cultures that kind of happened, for example, along the Volga River that eventually sacked Constantinople. But yeah, you also see the Norse gods, like you see Odin, especially in the beginning series, you see Odin in the form of like a man with a pointy hat with a raven on his shoulder. Really cool. And then when Ragnar dies, I think they're in Spain, or maybe it's Italy. Bjorn, Ragnar's biggest, coolest, most muscly son, with an absolute man of a like that jawline on him. Bloody hell, he could smash through a table, that jawline. Yeah, he's in Spain, but for some reason he feels his father die, you know, because
and the fact all of them feel him.
Yeah, exactly. But he sees Odin in that scene from a distance. He comes across as a one-eyed man because Odin has one eye, and really cool. I like that epic sort of religious symbology, because religion was so goddamn important to people back then. There's no way you could make a show without putting in the importance of religion in it. I guess what's one more thing I liked about the show that I just think was great. I guess, it is like Game of Thrones, isn't it? Everyone's plotting. There's so much scheming going on.
Yeah.
And it's quite exciting when they go in the first couple of series, they go, right, we're going to go to England and we're going to go to France, but they go off on these ventures and like, oh, I can't wait. And they build up to it a lot. It's not just like in and out.
Because like, to your point, and I think another thing I like about the show is that you see like the progression of like Viking culture through like Ragnar Lothbrok. Like you just see his specific town. And then you, in season 2 and 3, as his fame grows, you see other aspects of Viking culture. Yeah,
but I think it starts to fade away a little bit. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I think it starts off, season 1 and 2 and 3, they sort of build up, but then it fades away and it just becomes about plotting and fighting and murders. That's why, because like you have those scenes where, for example, the Blood Eagle that Ragnar does on Jarl Borg is, whoa, just so epic, amazing. And with, I think Wardruna doing the soundtrack to it has such this like dark Norse folk feel about it, like, whoa.
Yeah, and like you remember one of the scenes, I think they said like once every 7 years, like for good weather or for good omens, someone has to sacrifice themselves. There's like three or four that people.
Festival,
and I was like, if I knew the festival was happening, I'd be elsewhere. Like
the best bit is, I remember that scene is like when they're collecting, because they have all the animals pen. They have certain pens set up for them. The ones they're going to sacrifice. They also the humans they're going to sacrifice. They put them in a pen as well. I was like, God, at least put them in like a tent or something, not a bloody tent, like a pen like cattle. Yeah, that was cool. I really liked. Sometimes I preferred even that rather than just the fighting parts of Vikings, because you see the cool cultural aspects that I think has made a revival in the modern era to an extent with music, and some people just want a change from normal modern life of its iPhones and its TikTok and its brunches, bottomless brunches. God, clutching on straws there. And also the seer in it as well.
Yeah, I think amazing character. And like, you then start to ask yourself, does he actually know? Or is this just like guesswork that then comes out to be, does he say stuff that is vague and then comes out to be true? Or is it that he's actually very knowledgeable?
Yeah, the best bit is you have to lick his hand when you want to go in for advice. But yeah, it's cool. I do like the epicness of him. Are people asking for their futures and stuff? And yeah, weird, very freaky guy. He looks like, I think he's blinded at birth or something. I think you kind of see his face
as well. Yeah,
and his lips are so blue, man. He must be eating blueberries all the time or something. Holy cow! I mean, wow. I love Vikings. I'd give the show, I think at its prime, I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10. I think its prime. I think it peaked in a season with France and Paris. I think that's when it peaked. Then it slowly went downhill. I think it's after Ragnar died, it kind of lost a lot of steam, I felt.
Yeah.
But I just think the character, the guy that played Ragnar, what was his name? Travis Fimmel as Ragnar Lothbrok, really carried the show. Catherine Winnick as Lagartha, really good. And Clive Standen as Rollo. Amazing people. And of course, Floki, played by Gustav Skarsgård. Wow.
I think that's one of the things I do love about the show is that they got really good actors. Like, you sometimes forget that they're just acting in a role. Like especially the guy who plays like Floki, the way that he behaves and like his manic laughter is like so hilarious.
Yeah, Floki was a great character. Just it's like
yes.
And his unpredictableness as well. Like sometimes he's really Ragnar's friend, sometimes he's really not sure, and you think he's actually a bit like he's got some sort of like mental health
because I think
disorder.
that's one of the things that they wanted to link towards. And he even said it himself that sometimes he feels like he's at top of the world, and sometimes he feels like down in the dirt.
Definitely got bipolar disorder.
And like for him, it was like that's why I think he started to clutch onto religion.
Yeah, especially with Applestan, because oh my, I can't remember what season it is.
He then blamed like all the hardships that they were going through on Applestan, and was like, the hardships that I'm going through, that we're going through, that Ragnar's going through, is because of Applestan. If I then kill Applestan, all this hardships will then disappear. Yeah,
and that in season 3, that's when that happens. And man, what a great like scene that when Floki gets off the boat, and you actually see Wardruna, the band, doing the soundtrack to that very scene. Just literally, they're actually playing on the shore side there, and the song, I can't remember what it's literally called. I think it's literally called "Floki Kills Applestan." Is amazing, and like when he confronts Applestan, he's gone back to Christianity again. I think he goes back. I think he zigzags in and out of Christianity and Vikingism so much, and Athelstan's just sitting there as if waiting for him, as if he's seen this, like, "Hi, Floki," and Floki's like, "Priest," and then goes for it.
He never calls him his name. It's always priest or the priest.
So cool.
And I remember, like, in season 3 when they're in France, that they didn't listen to him. Like, all the different groups for some reason were like, you know what, we don't need to listen to Ragnar. So they ended up in an issue, and then that's when Ragnar pretended to be ill.
Yeah,
and then which is also historical. That actually did happen. That the Vikings were trying to invade a city or town in northern France, and basically they realized, okay, then how do we break in? He said, all right, then we'll say that the person wants to be sanctified before they pass on. They hide like the weapons inside of like the kind of like coffin that they're carrying the person in.
It's like a Trojan horse, isn't it?
And once the doors open, they go into the actual hall. They then bring out the weapons. They then raid them and then leave.
Yeah, pretty cool that scene, especially like how I think they hold someone hostage. Was it the princess for a couple of moments? Yeah. I loved it also that when Ragnar was pretending to be dead, and he was also, people were going to his coffin. Or whatever they were containing, because I guess, I don't know if they had coffins, but whatever vessel they were containing his so-called dead body, and even though he was alive, he was listening to them all confess to him, because, I guess if you hate someone so much, you'd go up to their grave to piss on it as such. That's so funny. Like, I'm going to do that one day, pretend I'm dead. Just hide in my car and just hear everyone talking crap about me. And then when I come out, I'll just be like, go for him. I'll just be like, finish him. I know what you said. Yeah, I know. You can find out your enemies that way. God, what a show. What a show. So, we've mentioned Vikings, like a great TV show. But what about The Last Kingdom? Now, The Last Kingdom, I would say at times is on par with Vikings, but I think I just prefer Vikings because it came before, and I think the soundtrack from it is just so wowza and epic, where they integrate Norse folklore into it. So The Last Kingdom is based on Bernard Cornwell's The Saxon book series. The TV show premiered in 2015. Here you go. You were right. The second season, it was originally done by BBC, but the second season was co-produced by Netflix. And then in 2018, Netflix finally acquired full production rights. And the conclusive series was in 2022. But, and this is what I was researching online, Seven Kings Must Die was a feature-length sequel that came out afterwards. Did you see that? No. I'd never heard of that before. Maybe one of our audience members can comment about that. But what the hell is Seven Kings Must Die? I didn't finish watching The Last Kingdom. The furthest I got was season 4 with the battle against Canute the Great. They emerged victorious. The king of Cumbria Cumbria. That's Colombian folk music. The king of Cumbria has sustained a head injury. He's like on his deathbed, and everyone's plotting to take over. And Wessex wants to install someone, and Uhtred's run off with Alfred's daughter, who he's probably in love with. Man, Uhtred, son of Uhtred. What a guy. He's he's hot. He's a player. He's bit of both. He's a Dane, but also a Saxon.
Yeah. Saxon, Norse pagan.
Yeah, an apostate. I love whenever they get like a priest or like the archbishop in these historical shows, they get the best actors. They always got a bit of a gobble to them and like, you're apostate against man, and always corrupt as well.
Yes.
But yeah, Uhtredson, what a guy. Like, wow, so cool.
Yeah, and to like your point, I would say that's like the heir to Vikings. And like just looking like at the history, you've got like, I think it's maybe like 30 or 40 year gap between the end of Vikings and then the beginning of the Last Kingdom. So it's like
in terms of
so it's like a full-on continuation.
Because they do mention Ragnar Lothbrok in the Last Kingdom, but it never sort of portrays Ragnar Lothbrok in such a way. It's more just the emotional connection that Uhtred has with him, even though he was taken from England as a slave, but develops a adopted son's relationship.
Is that Ragnar's son? Because like, if you think about it, like timeline wise, Ragnar died like when Alfred was
if he existed,
when Alfred was still a child, and King Alfred is older than Uhtred. So it could be actually Ragnar that they've then used it again, or it could be a son of Ragnar, potentially. Could be.
I mean, I wouldn't expect these shows, because these shows are made by different people. I wouldn't expect them to have any coherence with each other. It would be nice if they did that, but
And like, even if you look at history, like Alfred had 3 older brothers who all died. Like, I think 2 of them, one died of disease and 2 of them died.
So fighting. Alfred was never meant to be on the Wessex, the throne of Wessex.
Yeah. So like, Alfred, his older brother, who's king, he then died. You actually see it in like Last Kingdom. He died of an illness. Yeah. And then I think one of them died fighting. 2 of them died fighting the Vikings, and I think even his father might have died as well fighting the Vikings as well. And funny enough, his father is Egbbert's son in Vikings, and like
okay.
And you kind of see like with the way that he's portrayed is that there might be like a genetic illness that, because most of the TV series you see Alfred as being like ill at some point.
Yeah.
And
also just being a pain in the ass to Uhtred.
And I think like as a king, you kind of like see why Alfred is doing it, because he's like, I have a kingdom that I need to withhold, and I don't want to then just die and everything crumble. So if I can continually get Uhtred's service, I can then say that my son will then be king, and then his son will be king, and then the line of Wessex won't get wiped out like all the other
and to
lines.
Unite England as well. Yeah. That was his dream, to have one united England, and I mean that doesn't happen in his lifetime, but it looked like, from what I could see, his son was in the machinations of doing it with what was going on in Cumbria. One thing I found funny is, there's this scene in season 4 where Uhtred is getting it on with Alfred's daughter. Alfred's long dead at this point. And Uhtred's like, oh, your father was just using me. I love his accent, by the way. The Danes. Your father was just using me, blah, blah, to, get his way. And she was like, maybe I should use you too. and he's proper turned on by that.
Also, funny enough, 2 of the children of Alfred, so he has the bastard son who becomes a priest.
Yeah.
And his daughter are also in House of the Dragon.
Oh, as actors.
Yeah. So
which two they play?
Aemon, the one with the missing eye, and also The daughter.
Aemon and House of... Which one was it? Oh, my God,
yeah. And the daughter, she plays the... You know, the older version of my days... The king's daughter who prophesies the future.
Yeah, she's like, there's a dragon under the floorboards. There's a dragon... Oh,
yeah.
Cool. I like it.
So they brought both of them. Funnily enough, there were siblings in one, and now they're siblings in another show. So they brought them both onto that show.
I love it when people get typecasted from medieval style series. Like the guy who plays Harold Westerling in House of the Dragon was in Outlander. He's in The Witcher. You know him. You see him a lot. He's just plays such a good older, seasoned, grizzled man in a fantasy or a medieval show. I did not know those two were in there. That's cool. They all just borrow like the best actors, don't they?
And they're probably thinking, well, we've seen them act in a dark / middle-aged period, so why don't we just port them back into this show? Yeah.
Oh man, it's good. I like The Last Kingdom. I'd say it's quite entertaining because it sort of follows kind of like rather than the plotting and scheming of Vikings and therefore Game of Thrones, whilst that sort of happens, unless it's more of an adventure.
Yeah.
Although I guess Vikings does feel like adventure as well, because that's that cool moment. You see the build up of when they're going to go on a raid. They always build up to it, and then they what happens on the raid and how they come back. Unless it's kind of a adventure around England, you don't really see much of Scandinavia.
And the conflict is like more personal on a smaller scale, because like in Vikings it was like a smaller scale, especially at the end of season 1, where Ragnar defeats the current chief in the single combat, and then is then hailed as the chief of their town.
Yeah,
and then you then get bigger and bigger and bigger. He then becomes like a full-on king, and then his descendants, his children, then travel the world. So then it gets larger and larger. But then I think the one thing I did like about Last Kingdom is that you actually did get to see like more of Viking culture, and also the intertwining between...
What, in The Last Kingdom?
Yeah, then like in the...
What sort of stuff?
So, you know, like in season 2...
Yeah.
When they're talking about like curses, when...
Oh, what, Skade and that weird curse?
Yeah, puts the curse on Uhtred, and then he therefore has to then kill her without actually drawing blood. So he then drowns her.
Yeah.
And like the fact that you also saw like the like coming together of the Saxon and Danish culture. So like
through Uhtred?
Yeah, through Uhtred, and also the priest that looks after him.
Yeah, Father Bjorn.
Bjorn always has his back. That he then marries Ragnar's stepsister, and then they then start to then.
Roughly.
So she has like ginger hair, and sadly she ends up getting killed because what was Alfred's nephew, that scheming bastard. Like every time that he would given a chance, he was like, you know what, I'm gonna scheme again. And like the fact he kept on going like, oh, I should really be king, my father was king. But what happened with Saxon culture was that it was very similar to like other cultures, like the cultures linking to like parts of the Mongolian Empire, where you would have like I forgot what it's called, like kind of like similar to like a land's meet, or potentially a Witten, yes.
Witten, okay.
Where you would sit down and then you would have, okay, these are the eligible people of the Wessex family who we're going to pick as our next king.
Yeah.
So the Witten chose Alfred because they saw how his nephew was, and like literally a drunkard, a person who was literally a whoremonger.
Yeah, I forgot about him.
Yeah, so they basically,
short dude.
Yeah,
I totally forgot about him.
Yeah,
and he becomes kind of one of Uhtred's sort of like allies at one point.
Yeah, and then remember, like in I think it's season 2 or season 3, that Alfred is like, he's on his deathbed and he's like, he's betrayed them one more time, and he's like, I don't want to not go to heaven because I've just killed my nephew. Because another key thing at the time was like, is also now that kinslaying, you can even see it in like in Game of Thrones, when kinslaying is seen as like a major taboo within nearly all cultures. So he's like, he loved his brother, and he was like, can I kill his nephew? Even though if he wasn't his nephew, he would have been hung like years ago. But he's like, I can't do it. So they then decide to blind him.
Yeah, that's pretty mental. I totally forgot about that whole storyline plot because I've been finishing watching season 4, but that was after a long hiatus of not watching it. Yeah, goodness me, yeah. Wow, it's quite sad when Father Bjorn dies in season 4. Actually, when they try and retake Bebbanburg, and they're like, nope, this completely failed. Do they actually retake Bebbanburg in the end? Does Uhtred actually get it?
I think he might do, but I haven't watched that far.
Yeah,
but I think like one of the things that you do see with like the series is like the historical elements are like the side discussion within the TV series.
It's just the personal stuff.
But with Vikings, it's like no. The historical stuff is a part of the main series.
Yeah, it has that big interlinking.
Yeah,
I guess the thing as well that's different in the Last Kingdom is religion. Like you don't see the gods. Correct me if I'm wrong. You don't see the gods in the Last Kingdom. It feels more real in that it's that the gods aren't coming to you and there's these visions and weird prophecies. It is actually just feels more set in the actual world. I would say it. I kind of like that about it, but in the Vikings, I just loved how those visions, especially Applestan, seeing Christ, but then also seeing like Odin and stuff. Yeah. So cool.
Like, he even like had a passage like he says when he hears thunder and sees the lightning, he can see Thor, but also in like the morning he can see Christ, and it's like he's having that thing that he's caught between two. And I think like that was like a key element of the show as well. Yeah,
big time. And I think that's what makes Vikings stand out to the Last Kingdom for sure. Some other parts of the Last Kingdom, well, interesting how everyone speaks English in it. They didn't bother with any of the language side of things. They're like, oh, Vikings can speak English. Oh, Saxons can speak Saxon-English. All good. That's not talk about it. There was nothing mentioned about that, which is a bit of a shame.
One of the things they do, which I think Vikings does as well, is that they turn the names, like especially when they have like a place, like if they're showing London, they show the actual Saxon name, and then they turn it into what we see nowadays.
What we call it now.
So like Winchester is a common one because I think that's like the seat of the Saxons and the seat of Wessex. So I think that also brings like a form of like realism to it as well. And I think like with the whole thing with like the Last Kingdom is like it's Uhtred's story. And I think that's
Uhtred, son of Uhtred.
And like Vikings is like, Ragnarok is a lead character, but it's actually about Vikings. It's about the different Vikings that are in. Basically, it's about their town, and it's about like how the Vikings first went to Britain, how they then explored Europe, how the way that they traveled around different parts of the kingdom,
and the culture,
and the culture as well. And I think that's why I think I kind of like Vikings more, because then it gives me more of like they're grounded in history. Like, okay, then this might not be completely accurate to history, but this did happen. This is how the Vikings would have acted. This is how they would have traded. And like, for example, when you had when Ragnar bought the slave woman who was from China.
Yeah.
The fact that
we barely even talked about that. That was so cool.
The fact that you probably did have that type of association where people and objects, to your point, were traded all the way from China all the way up into Scandinavia because of like the
trade routes,
the trade routes, and the fact that Vikings were all going all the way down to Constantinople. And if you think about it, like the actual, what's it called again? The road,
Silk Road.
The Silk Road was going all the way to Baghdad. So you said that there were Viking remnants in Baghdad. It's most likely that they went there to trade.
Possibly, or a like what do you call it, a hybrid culture, possibly. Yeah. Because it gets to a point where it gets a bit blurry. It's like, what do you define as a Viking? But it could even be the OGs went that far. Who knows?
Yeah.
What was I going to say about Last Kingdom? Yeah, that's the thing. Last Kingdom doesn't really delve into too much about the Vikings, really. It's more about England and Christianity. Whilst Vikings are just the dudes, and you don't see much of like their culture, such as some of the stuff we spoke about in the Vikings TV show. You know, you hear Uhtred, you know, saying that he, you know, talks about his gods a little bit. Like there's a scene in season 4. It's like, what do you believe when you die in his beliefs? I believe I go to Valhalla. I hope that jumped everyone. I love the absolute bluntness of that soundboard button. But yeah, definitely more on the England side because it's about uniting England, I guess, and hence the name, the Last Kingdom.
Because like Wessex was the Lost Kingdom after the Great Heathen Army invaded.
Yeah. So to be clear, what do you prefer, Vikings or Last Kingdom?
Vikings.
Yeah, me too. I'd love it. I kind of want to rewatch Vikings from season 1 because it's just...
talking now has really got me into thinking. Yeah.
So epic. So we're talking about, you know, Viking history, talking about Vikings TV shows, talking about Last Kingdom. I think we need to bust some urban myths about Vikings. So this one's so obvious because it's been pretty publicly rescinded, is the Vikings wore horned helmets. Yeah. I'm glad that in both TV shows that we've seen, they didn't go there.
Go back to the stereotype.
Yeah. Where did that even
come from? It came from an opera.
An opera, right?
Yeah, so someone no, it wasn't an opera. Someone did you know how people like draw pictures and paintings of things of the past?
Yeah.
They just drew like them having horns. And then that was then carried into like everything in life. And the fact that it's like, for example, with pirates, they never asked someone to walk the plank, but it was written in a book. So then everyone thinks, oh, from that book, the pirates must have done it. They always did it.
Oh, fair enough. I did not know that about pirates. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess, you know, you see, like, I remember I was at a music festival and I saw some people waving Swedish people waving a Swedish flag or wearing horned helmets. And I just found it so ironic seeing them because I guess, you know, in that setting, you're not going to go up to someone in a music festival and, that's not historically accurate. Like, it's a music festival. Who gives a crap? But yeah, I'm glad that both shows skipped out on that. So I remember when I was a kid, I think I was in New York, and there's these special boats you can go on that are modern, like amphibious vehicles, so you can go into the water. But they really loved trading off on their Viking heritage there. And I just remember buying a horned helmet. I was kind of like, oh, I'm a Viking. It was so inaccurate. It's just merchandise these days. Another urban myth. Blood eagles, actually. This is debatable because, as you know, Ragnar Lothbrok, blood eagles, Jarl Borg, which, to explain to our audience, a blood eagle is when this could be an urban myth. There's a lot of historical debate over whether there's an exaggeration of how Ragnar Lothbrok executed Jarl Borg, but essentially the theory is that you tie someone to a post and you open them up. You cut up their skin and slowly open up and remove their lungs, all their organs, and display it out. And then the crows, etc., will come pick at them. And if you scream... Yeah,
you then don't enter Valhalla.
Yeah.
When I heard that, I was like... When I heard that in Vikings, I was like, damn, that's evil.
Yeah.
That is evil to the core. Like,
I would scream. I'd scream before I even get touched by the knife. I'd be like, oh, please don't blood eagle me. Just kill me. Just chop my head off. Like, yeah, it's mental. But yeah, there's historical debate over it. They're not, so again, they're not sure. And it's one of those things where, especially because Vikings, you know, tell stories through runes and through oral traditions that
they can then be exaggerated.
Yeah, exactly. Like the whole idea of Ragnar. So again, it's really hard to pin that down, really, just based on some of the reading I was doing. Do you want to hear some fun trivia about Vikings?
Yeah.
Or at least the one piece I found. So the Bluetooth symbol, do you know about this?
Yes, I actually found that out recently. Yeah.
Crazy, isn't it?
It is.
Crazy. You know, you go on your phone, you're like, I'm going to connect to my wireless headphones. You turn on your Bluetooth. The Bluetooth symbol is based on a Viking bind rune for the initials of King Harold Bluetooth, who lived from 958 to 986. And it's a combination of like his initials, but also some symbology. And that's just crazy because these are Vikings, and back then, quite smaller number compared to some of the places they raided, because life was tough in Scandinavia, hence why they raided. So their population was smaller, but they were big, strong people. And the fact that they've left their mark on modern civilization in the form of a symbol that you could be living in Thailand or Saudi Arabia, and you get out your smartphone and turn on Bluetooth, and there is a Viking symbol.
And you're literally saying his monorism as well. Like every time you say Bluetooth.
It's crazy, isn't it? That's Vikings now sailing digitally as opposed to sailing physically back in the age of Viking destiny. Like, I find that so crazy and kind of like epic that they've made their stamp on history like that.
Yeah, and like one thing that I did find out is that some historians believe that when like Harold Hardrada lost to Howard Godwinson, that it ended the golden age of like expedition.
What was it, 1066?
Yeah, 1066, yeah. Right. So it ended like the golden age of Viking exploration, and like some historians believed that if Harold Hardrada had been the king of Norway, I think maybe the king of Denmark as well, and the king of England, and had taken the throne, that exploration would have continued out west.
Really? What, before even before, say, I guess like who's the guy who discovered the East Indies?
I think Christopher Columbus.
Yeah, so theoretically we could have actually had an earlier European
settlement, because they were thinking that, well, after they'd lost England, they lost a key place to stop off, and also they lost a huge tax base that could fund the explorations.
Yeah,
the Normans were basically French, so they were European looking, so they looked towards Europe and their lands in Europe, because when William the Conqueror became King of England, he was also still the Duke of Normandy. Right. So his eyes were still on, can I get more land in France, which his descendants were able to as well. And that even if the Saxons had won, they would have just focused on conglomerating England and making that secure. But the fact that if Harold Hardrada had won, there would have been more explorations, being able to take money from like a huge tax base.
Yeah.
And then I was like, but isn't that far? But if you look at it in a map, so for viewers, if you go to Google Maps and you look at Scotland, and you basically...
I'm going to do that right now.
You turn it and you think that, the travel would be long. But if you just stop off, like if you go from Norway, stop off in the Shetland Islands, stop off in the north of Scotland, then go to the Faroe Islands to stop off, stop off in Iceland, then Greenland, possible. And then you then land in North America. It's not as far because they still had like an outpost in Greenland. So literally, some historians were thinking that they would have explored and had settlements in America, and exploration would have continued out west.
Yeah, possibly that could have happened actually. That's an interesting look at I love these sort of like alternative history things. By the way, just looking at the map, I realized Newfoundland is in Canada, not in the USA. So sorry, American audience, correction there. But yeah, it doesn't actually seem so far, because I guess when people think of like historical sea travel, they think that people just go from A to B. But they do hop off points because they need to refuel, and seasickness and wave currents. It's very unpredictable and dangerous. And even then, like being so far away, so like the Vinland colonies that the Vikings had didn't last. I think they fell apart just because it was so far away, the harsh winters and difficulty resupplying. And also there's some sort of traces that they might have encountered Native Americans and like Europeans did in the oncoming years. They fought with them, so potentially that's why it never stood its ground and stood root, and therefore became a Viking colony. And imagine if the USA and Canada today actually were speaking a dialect of a Norse language because that colony had survived and England had been conquered by...
And like, funnily enough, when the Normans took over, they then made people speak French, and like the elite spoke French. Right. So I learned it in history. So like beef is French, so is venison, so is what's
courgette.
Pork is another one, which is French. So the way that they did it was like, if it's in the field, it's English/Saxon. So pig, Cow is based off like a mixture of like Germanic language,
right?
But then when it's on a plate, cooked, served to the rich and wealthy, it's then French, so it's more romantic languages. So he said like that's what they did, is that anything that was elite and upper class was then of the French language, and that's where
it still is today. I feel,
and that's where like you've got like Palace is another one. Like that's
French
where we
word,
get a lot of the Romanic languages into English is from the Normans. So if Harald Hardrada had won, he would have then imposed like full on Norwegian. So then people in England wouldn't really call themselves English. They would see themselves more as Norwegian.
Yeah, and the naming of things would have been different.
Yeah.
The way we describe. There are still traces of that, though. There's still a lot of places that do hold their Viking names, especially in areas such as Scotland or Ireland, or even like north of England. Like I can't remember off the top of my head, but there were a couple of places. I went on like a tour around Scotland in 2021, and I was told that there's a lot of places that do still have their Norse names that were given to them. I'll have to get back to you on that one because I didn't do my research on it. But you can see those traces, and English is a Germanic language coming from Saxon. So even before the Vikings, before the Normans, the British tribe or whatever we were, we were Saxons after that because we were invaded by someone else.
So like I can even give you like a brief history about it. It's just so weird. So like the Visigoths and the Alans and the other tribes had invaded Rome.
Yeah.
So then the Rome basically said we need to recall people from our territories which were on the outskirts. So then the Romans left. So then you had like this Celtic British hybrid culture that was here in the UK.
Right.
So what happened was the Picts in Scotland,
right,
realizing the Romans weren't there anymore, were like, oh, easy pickings. Were then attacking the Britons, who were Celtic and Roman combined.
Right.
And they were fighting them. So as they would do, the Britons were like, we need to bring in some people to help us. So they then invited two Saxon brothers to come over to England to then fight the Picts. They did, but guess what? They liked the place, so they stayed. And then one of the things that people say is that people forget that the Saxons did more than the actual Vikings.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, they won.
The Saxons literally took all of England and also kind of like removed very much of like British, like Celtic Roman culture.
Yeah.
And they said that the Brittany was founded by Britons who left and fled the Saxons and developed Brittany, which was technically called Little Britain.
Just like a good TV show.
And like, I found this out just playing from like Total War Saga Britannia, that the actual full-on at the time descendants of the Celtic Britons, because people forget that Wales was 100% within the Roman Empire, was the Welsh, because as the Saxons were coming in from the southeast and also from the east, the actual Britons would move further west, and then that's when they then moved into Wales.
Right, and so essentially they are the OG British people. Well, unless the people before the Romans, you count that. But God, yeah, you just go back. It's funny. There's a lot of different like historical mixing that's gone on in the UK. There's this whole idea that we're an island nation. We're quite aloof from what goes on in Europe with all the wars, all the invasions, etc., all the mixing. But it's happened to the UK plenty. Like there's so much that's gone on and that's shaped our language and shaped our culture, shaped the names of places we live in, shaped the food as well. It's pretty mental.
And like the weird thing is that historians have said like 1,000 years ago, it kind of felt as if the Europe kind of stabilized. So like the Scots, so the original tribes of Scotland were the Picts, but then they were then defeated by the Scots, which were the Scota, which were a Northern Irish tribe that moved into Scotland. Hence, Scotland, land of the Scots.
Right.
The Angles settled in England to call it England, so Angle land.
Yeah.
You had the Franks in France, so you've got Franzia, so Franks.
Yeah.
You then would have in Germany, so the Germanic tribes coming together to make Germany. Mm-hmm. You had a tribe called the Poles that developed Poland. You would then also have the Bulgars, which were then developed into Bulgaria.
Yeah.
And then the fact that you would have like many of the tribes have been able to then settle and then gone back to their names. So like, for example, even though like you had like Prussia, you had the many different factions within Germany, they all saw their Germanic roots.
Yeah, and they're based on a common tribe or common heritage. And I don't want to delve into this too much because we could definitely go down a tangent here. Yeah, but if you look at historical trends of tribes moving, they've always been coming from the east into the west because of fertile land and safe environments. You know, the winters are just too cold in the east, and it can be quite hard to grow stuff, whilst the land can be very fertile in the west, and the temperature and climate's a bit more manageable and bearable, so it supports a stronger population. You see so many tribes moving in, and you are so right. Like, for example, Hungarian people are based on, and Finnish people possibly to an extent are based on the same tribe that came from the Ural Mountains, looking for somewhere that's more hospitable to call home. Like, it's a trend, and you can see why a lot of countries have those roots.
And just one last thing, it's just weird because at times, especially with like the Roman Empire, when people were coming east, was like, no, not coming east, coming west and invading into the empire was because another tribe had kicked them out. So like a tribe had gotten powerful. They then push one tribe, who then pushes another, who then pushes another. And then they then attack Rome. Rome then defeats the first one. Then the second one comes, defeats the second one. So like one of the tribes that came and attacked Rome was able to defeat. But they were fleeing the Huns. So like literally you've got tribes coming from...
There's always a bigger fish, just like they said in the Phantom Menace. Yeah, another one comes for you. Yeah, we should definitely do some more history podcasts, because this feel like this has been a very passionate discussion about something we both really love, and you know, I'm happy to do more. We should talk about the Roman Empire. We should talk about the unification of Germany. We could talk about the World Wars. Yeah. God, there's so many we could talk about. We could talk about Napoleon with the big movie coming out as well. Yeah.
With no French being spoken in it at all.
Yeah. Oh, great. I just wish we'd do these historical dramas in the language of the times.
There was one that was done by Netflix called Barbarians, where it's about, I think it's about, Teutoburg Forest.
Yeah.
So you've got like the Germanic tribes, they're speaking the Germanic language that was like almost 2,000 years ago. And you've also got the Romans speaking Latin.
Right. Oh, that's good. Yeah. That's actually done down to a T. Well, as much as they can. Oh, Passion of the Christ as well. They speak Aramaic. And I really like it when you put the effort out there. It's just, I guess, a lot of these production firms, if you put it in English, it can reach a bigger audience, but it just doesn't quite have that authenticity.
But I think because of like with anime coming through and like, those really good dramas coming from Scandinavia.
Say trauma or drama?
Dramas, yeah. But there's a lot of them are traumatic.
The bridge.
And like shows like people, funny enough, there's an increased market in like watching Korean and Japanese actual daytime TV shows, or even like Squid Games as well. The Americans are finally starting to like watch stuff that have subtitles. Because like before, like that was like the key thing that stopped like these big companies from actually having having like TV shows or films in other languages, was that they would say Americans don't want to hear subtitles.
Yeah, bake into the market. Well, and it's changed. Like for example, that Korean movie Parasite winning best movie when there's a natural category for
best foreign film.
Foreign film. But I was so glad to see like that movie in a different language actually breaking in and making it to the best movie category. And even Donald Trump picked up on that and was like, "What the hell's up with that?" And I was like, "Well, this is like the Oscars supposed to be for like the entire world. It shouldn't have
called
to be
the Academy. It's not the American movie.
Yeah,
Awards.
Exactly. Oh, so bad. Well. It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it. We'll have some more history podcasts coming up soon, although this is history linked with popular culture. I think that's a good way to sort of get it out there. But we do have some other ones coming up soon. We're going to do Mass Effect. We're going to do The Dark Knight. And of course, we've got Ahsoka starting soon. You all better be watching that, because we're going to be doing a three episode per part sort of review, because, oh boy, I can't wait. You better not screw it up. That's all I'm saying, Disney. I'll be coming for you. I just want to say a big thank you to all our audience members and our subscribers, because this happened a little while ago, but we surpassed 1,000 followers, and that's always a really, really good part in podcasting, because you can just really start to expand so much more. So I'm really glad, and we couldn't have done it without you. And of course, we can't do it without Jeffrey as well.
Yes.
Our Lord and Savior, who is doing everything behind the scenes as part of the Pick Up the Mic network. And if you want to hear more from us, then please give us a subscribe, a like, and a comment, and I will do my best to get back to you, as well as Josh and Jeffrey. And if you want to hear more about the Pick Up the Mic network, check out their website, where you can see all the other areas and topics they talk about. Don't forget, we've also got our Patreon, because cash is money and money is cash, and that makes the world go round. That doesn't make sense. But yeah, please check out our Patreon. And one last thing.
I knew you were going to do it.
Yeah, I had to. Well, that's all, folks. We'll see you soon.
See ya, folks.
Bye-bye.